Just kind of go over the rules of the debate so you can kind of know what to expect. I think when everyone came in, you should have gotten a little slip.
If you hadn't raised your hand, we'll give one to you.
If you hadn't, we'll be sure to hand them out. On it, you'll see the prompt for today's debate. This House believes that media outlets should be punished for publishing fake news or incorrect facts. So this is how it's going to work. At the beginning of the debate, everyone's going to go ahead and put down you agree or disagree. Okay, this is before you listen to any of the debaters. This is just kind of your own general opinion. Afterwards, we're going to go, so we have 2 teams of 3 here. Right? We have the against team on this side, and then the pro team on this side. Right? After everything's done, you're going to vote again, and then we're going to tally up the before and after. So the net swing is what determines the winner, the winning side.
And what we believe must happen is not something new at all. Slander, libel, and fraud are all punishable actions if you wish to distort the truth for your own personal end, be that personal, be that political, be that financial. What we are arguing for is the right to protect truth, because it is a public good. And as with many public goods, it sometimes does require intervention to sustain it. I want to talk about the Spanish-American War of 1898. And it was actually famously referred to as the Journal War after the New York Journal, because it had a vital role in actually disseminating information and fomenting public unrest in exaggerating atrocities which had happened within the island of Cuba. Frederick Remington was an artist who was sent to Cuba. They didn't have photographs then. He was sent to Cuba in order to actually report on goings on there. He found that reports of gross abuse against the residents were actually exaggerated. So he responded to that to his editor. He told him that this is not the case. The agenda we want to push is not actually what's happening. To which his editor responded, "You furnish me the pictures, and I will furnish you the war." We do want to stress that objective truths exist. It is the responsibility of the press to report the news accurately to the best of their ability. 3 key points that I have described. The first is that fake news is very real. The second is that objective truth exists and is a critical public good. And finally, it must be protected. Those who willingly mask it must be punished. Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to actually look back and look towards a very familiar historical example of Galileo, who propounded that the earth rotated around the sun, and guess what the Catholic Church did? They prosecuted him. Why? Because he was propagating what was fake news. Now, laws enforcing the freedom of speech and of the press are universal liberal values that we hold very close to our hearts. For what? To protect democracy and to protect our people. What we have heard from the proposition directly undermines and jeopardizes the freedoms that we hold dear. I have a few questions for the proposition. Who will define what is truth? What is punishment? Who will be responsible for prosecuting these falsehoods? Let's look at a very recent case, the Bowling Green massacre rows. Who will be punished? Kellyanne Conway, an official advisor to the White House, or CNN for hosting her? The House's motion is full of holes and leaves ample space for countries to slip down a slippery slope concerning freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. The proposition has claimed that enforcing the truth will protect the population, but we insist this will achieve the exact opposite. The House's motion echoes similar sentiments to that of Sean Spicer when he claimed 2 weeks ago that the press must be held accountable for deliberate false reporting. What false reporting was he referring to? News that unfairly represented crowd sizes at the inauguration? This is dangerous territory, where a government wants to hold the media accountable on something so minute while lying simultaneously. Information transaction is give and take. So if the news agency is culpable for producing fake news, how can you absolve the people who share it on social media websites? A recent Pew Research report showed that 74% of the survey takers said that the general public are indeed responsible for the spread of fake news more than that of the government and the agencies. They said objective truth does not exist. Does exist. What do you see? 6. This is 9. What can you say about this? So finally, to finish,
in recent memory, we've heard about alternative facts, and the House rejects the idea. There are interpretations, and then there are facts. There's science, and then there's flipping a piece of paper to turn a 6 into a 9. Also, he quoted the Pew Research Center as talking about how the general public is more responsible for the spread of fake news. And while that may be the case with the advent of social media, the general public is not responsible for the creation of fake news. That is the news media outlets, which the House feels should be punished. The opposition posed some questions to us about the nature of the punishment and who would be doing the punishment. And we want to remind the opposition that the resolution that we're here to discuss today is should media outlets be punished for publishing fake news. Not who's doing the punishment, not the nature of the punishing, not what you're going to wear to the hearing. It should. And the House believes, without question, that media outlets should be punished for publishing fake news and false or inaccurate reporting because of the significance and because of the damage that it does.
So you suggest that there's vigilante justice against public news outlets? Like, who is going to be doing the punishment? That is a critical definition of this motion on how your motion is actually feasible in a society.
Well, thank you for the question, and I'm so glad that you're thinking ahead about who is doing the punishment. That just shows that we agree that the punishment must happen. And so, your quote, a well-informed citizenry, being necessary to the liberty of a free state is fundamental to democracy. And we can't begin to talk about a well-informed citizenry with such misinformation in the system. So, should? Yes, without question. Something must be done. Thank you.
And this side of the House believes that, simply to be put, that White House does exist as a news outlet itself, the government news. Let me put it to you with a simple example from 1972. President Nixon just won a re-election. He won the re-election, and everyone thought he would be a great president again for the remainder of that 4 years. Who would have known during this re-election time, that he had committed a terrible crime, where his staffers and his campaign staff have done that? How did the truth come out? It came out because two very hard-headed journalists from the Washington Post named Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein kept on pursuing what they believed to be the objective truth, what the government at the time believed to be utter lies, utter fake news.
How does an example of actual reporting make a case against fake news?
Well, let me get to it. The administration of those days did not have the terminology of fake news, but Nixon, for 2 years, denied any allegations and basically called the Washington Post fake news. But who else is calling these news agencies fake news today? President Trump. There is a strong correlation here. What I'm getting to, and what my colleague has already talked about, is the Orwellian world that the House perhaps fails to see if we go down this slippery slope. In 1984, I can give you a quick quote. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. We are talking about controlling information, ladies and gentlemen. The House is proposing there be one party who defines objective truth. Who has that power right now? My colleague has talked about the dangers this slippery slope poses to democracy, to freedom of speech, to the freedoms that we trust in our system, in our democracy, to protect not only our speech, but the press, those investigative journalists that ultimately brought down one of the most powerful leaders of the world. I painted to you why freedom of press, freedom of information is very important to safeguard our democracy, to be a check and balance against the powerful administration that we face today. So let it be known here that we are here to protect information, and that in turn is the value of our democracy, and we hope to have your support. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try to bring the argument back to where it belongs. There's been a lot of sensationalism. I've heard some slippery slope arguments, some straw man. We are arguing just on the basis of should they be punished. Before you can decide who, what, when, where, why, we have to agree on should they be punished. Clearly, we are not advocating that the executive branch control what is true and what is not. There are objective truths in journalism, and that's what we want to hold up. I'd like to go back and address the Galileo comment. Galileo lived in a theocracy, and we live in a democracy, and the executive government would not have the power to decide that he was wrong, the same way that our executive government today cannot decide if global warming is true or not. But people think there's no middle ground between control of the news. It's either nothing or a complete Orwellian society where the executive government controls what you think. I'm going to keep going.
If there is a middle ground, give us an example. If there is a middle ground where your motion can be implemented, then give us an example that the audience can relate to.
Anyway, here's an example. A law. Defamation law defined in our Constitution is aims to strike a balance between allowing the distribution of information, ideas, opinions, and protecting people from having lies told about them. It's the same way, except for people, you put events. Things happen, they are recorded, interpretations can be made and not regulated. That is the freedom of opinion and expression. And for the information, the U.S. has regulated broadcast media up until the 80s. There were 3 major news organizations, and they were held to nonpartisan, unbiased accountability. That wasn't until Reagan came into office and removed that. So famous people like Walter Cronkite were around during regulation. I'll bring it back down to the main core of our arguments, which is that objective truths are real, media should be held accountable, and let's not be over dramatic and sensationalize the issues. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to continue to be dramatic and sensationalistic because I just do not understand what we're hearing from this side of the room. Punishment is not the answer. They provided no empirical examples of any middle grounds that exist at all because there are none. Punishment is a gateway to turn a democracy into a dictatorship, into corruption and controlling of the media, which we do not want. We heard the proposition talk about how truth is a public good. I'm going to say that truth is not a public good. Healthcare is a public good. Education is a public good. If they think that truth is a public good, then maybe we should have a Ministry of Truth, which I think we shouldn't have. A couple of quotes.
Is BBC a fascist news organization?
Like, only relevant questions. A couple of quotes for the road before I move on. A couple of quotes that I want to present to you. Any negative polls are fake news. The failing New York Times writes total fiction about me. They are now making up stories and sources. That is none other than Mr. Trump, as you may have guessed, who is starting to sound more and more like the proposition on this side of the room. The House has been obsessed with enforcing the sanctity of facts and truths. But if the past US election cycle has taught us anything, it's that people's perception of what is true can be much more valuable than facts and figures. You can parade facts to the right that you're more likely to get killed by your vacuum cleaner than a radical Islamic terrorist, but that does not change what people believe to be true. Prevention, not punishment. This is the solution. And it's the answer to combating some of the issues that the proposition has brought up. We have heard the proposition whine and insist that punishment will somehow dissuade outlets from publishing fake news. But none of us actually believe this, right? We know that there are news organizations such as Russian-sponsored outlets that's main purpose is to disseminate fake news to other countries. First of all, it will be near impossible, but they don't want to talk about execution in terms of punishing international news agents. So what is the answer? What is the better answer? Education. This method is already happening in countries like the Czech Republic. They are educating their population on how to identify Russian propaganda that has emerged in full force ahead of their country's elections. To conclude, I want to forcefully reject the claims made by the proposition and insist that punishing media outlets is illegal by both international and American standards. This motion will not work to protect the masses, but will threaten democracy and suppress fundamental freedoms. This motion will create a dangerous precedent where countries like Iran, Syria, China, Turkey, and the list will go on, to use Western censorship legislation to justify their draconian actions. And lastly, we assert that prevention, not punishment, is the way forward, and for all of these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Operate outside of regulations that they're punished.
Let me put it to you with a simple example. When I have a headache, I take an Advil because the doctor says it's good. When I look at current events, there are 20 different versions of current events. That makes me have a headache. So how do I define what is fake? How do I figure out what is true?
You don't have it, whether people...
If you had an Advil, would you rather take Advil or I have this jar of magic pills I made?
It's about having choices. It's about having access to information.
The fact that I mentioned that
Choices empower people.
What do you think about
not empower people to make decisions. It does
I
not
asked the question.
The definition of education is being enlightened by information.
We now open the floor to the audience if the audience would like to ask any questions. You guys ever be friends?
Journalism. I think, when you talk about education, that's almost like that's what people on the Hill do. People say, let's talk about education.
I love education. We all love education. That's why we're here in the policy. We want to educate. We want to be educators. What is the best way to educate in a Trump administration?
What does that mean practically?
We cannot get
So when you leave here today,
We're all journalists.
I'm really sorry. You guys have 30 seconds to respond.
I think most of the questions that are actually arguing, like a lot of the questions that we wanted to raise, but like being
Never raised.
the more important. Sorry, I just get through my